2 in the morning. The room is dark and completely quiet. There was no sound that woke you, no dream that pulled you out, no obvious reason for your eyes to be open at this hour, your mind already running as if the day had already started without your permission. You lie there in the silence, waiting for sleep to return, and sometimes it does after 30 or 40 minutes of staring at the ceiling. Sometimes it does not return at all. You watch the clock move from 2 to 3 to 4, and you greet the morning already depleted before it has even fully arrived. And the most unsettling part of this pattern is not the lost sleep, as significant as that is. It is the consistency. 2 in the morning, again and again, with the reliability of an alarm nobody set, pulling you out of the deepest restoration your body is supposed to be doing, in a window of the night that your body chose for a reason you have never been told. Most people who experience this pattern reach for the same explanations that have been offered to them, or that they have assembled themselves from the available cultural vocabulary of sleep problems, stress, anxiety, getting older, a mind that will not quiet down. And sometimes those things are genuinely part of the picture, but beneath all of them, running with a biological specificity that the standard conversation about sleep almost never reaches, there are organ-level and hormonal events that are timed to the 2 in the morning window in ways that are not random, not mystical, and not coincidental. Your body wakes you at 2 in the morning for reasons that are as measurable as your blood pressure and as addressable as a vitamin deficiency. And if you have been dismissing the pattern for months or years as simply the way your sleep has become, what you are about to hear is going to reframe everything. If this is the kind of direct, biology-grounded health conversation you have been searching for, hit like and subscribe right now. Dr. Victor Lang built this channel to be the place where the body's signals get properly decoded, because the patterns that appear to be meaningless have mechanisms, and mechanisms have solutions. Stay with me, because the 2 in the morning wake-up is one of the most information-rich signals your body can produce, and understanding what it is actually saying changes what you do about it entirely. Let us begin with the circadian biology of the 2 in the morning window, because the body is not operating randomly at night. It is running through a precisely timed sequence of biologichical events that are governed by the circadian clock, the internal timekeeping system embedded in virtually every cell in your body, and coordinated by the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus. This internal clock does not just control when you feel sleepy and when you feel alert. It governs the timing of hormonal secretion, organ function, immune activity, metabolic processing, DNA repair, cellular detoxification, and dozens of other biological operations that are scheduled to specific windows of the night, because those windows are when the conditions are most favorable for each process. The 2 in the morning window is not an empty corridor in this schedule. It is one of the most biologically active periods of the entire 24-hour cycle, and what is happening in your body at this hour is exactly why waking during it is so informative. The first and most significant biological event concentrated in the 2 in the morning window is the peak of growth hormone secretion. Growth hormone, released by the pituitary gland in its most concentrated pulse of the entire day, floods the body in the hours between midnight and 3 in the morning, with the peak typically falling around 1 to 2 in the morning in adults on a normal sleep schedule. This growth hormone pulse is not just about physical growth, which is its most commonly recognized function. In adults, growth hormone governs tissue repair, muscle protein synthesis, fat metabolism, and immune system restoration. It is the body's primary signal to rebuild what the day has worn down. Adequate, uninterrupted sleep during this window is not just restful. It is structurally necessary for the repair and regeneration that this growth hormone pulse is designed to carry out. When you wake at 2 in the morning and cannot return to sleep for an extended period, you are disrupting the peak of this repair signal at the exact moment when it is most needed. Over weeks and months, this has cumulative consequences for tissue repair, immune resilience, and the general biological restoration that sleep is supposed to accomplish. But here is the deeper question that most people never ask. What is waking you up during this window in the first place? Because growth hormone secretion itself does not produce wakefulness. It is the other biological events converging in this same window, the ones that are creating enough physiological disturbance to pull you out of sleep, that are the real signal. And there are several specific mechanisms that the research has identified as primary drivers of the 2 in the morning waking pattern, each one pointing to a different underlying condition, and each one requiring a different response. The most common driver, and the one we discussed in a different context in another video on this channel, is the liver's processing cycle and its consequences for overnight blood sugar regulation. The liver enters its most intensive detoxification and metabolic processing phase in the period between 1 and 3 in the morning, a timing that is not arbitrary but reflects the circadian scheduling of the liver's peak enzymatic activity. When the liver is under strain from accumulated toxins, from fatty infiltration, from chronic inflammation, or from the simple overload of an evening dietary pattern that was too heavy or too late, the processing demand of this window exceeds the liver's available capacity. The resulting biochemical stress response triggers cortisol release, which elevates blood sugar through gluconeogenesis and activates the sympathetic nervous system in ways that are powerful enough to interrupt sleep. The wakefulness at 2 in the morning that people attribute to a restless mind is, in many cases, the cortisol and adrenaline released by a liver struggling through its peak processing window. Intertwined with the liver story is the blood sugar story, which operates through a slightly different but related mechanism. The overnight period is a fasting state, and the body maintains blood glucose during this fast through the liver's glycogen release. In people with any degree of insulin resistance, which affects a very large proportion of adults over 50, the liver's glycogen storage and release regulation is impaired. Blood sugar may drop more than it should in the early morning hours, triggering a counter-regulatory hormone response involving cortisol and adrenaline that raises blood sugar back up. This counter-regulatory response occurs at around 2 in the morning in many people with impaired overnight glucose regulation, and the physiological noise of the cortisol and adrenaline surge is sufficient to produce the abrupt, alert wakefulness that the 2 in the morning pattern is characterized by. The person lies awake with a slightly anxious, activated feeling that has no obvious emotional source, because the source is not emotional, it is metabolic. It is the adrenal glands responding to a blood sugar event that the conscious mind never registered. The adrenal system itself is the third major driver of 2 in the morning waking, and this one is perhaps the most overlooked in clinical conversations about sleep disruption. The adrenal glands operate on a circadian rhythm that parallels the liver's, with a secondary activation peak in the very early morning hours that serves as part of the preparation for the day's metabolic demands. In people with adrenal dysregulation, which is often described clinically as HPA axis dysfunction and which can result from chronic stress, sleep deprivation, or prolonged illness, this early morning adrenal activation becomes dysregulated. Rather than the gradual, appropriate cortisol rise that should build from around 4 or 5 in the morning toward the full morning cortisol peak, dysregulated adrenals can produce cortisol surges at 2 or 3 in the morning that are intense enough to produce full wakefulness and the characteristic feeling of a mind that has been switched on without warning. The person lying awake at 2 feels anxious, alert, and unable to understand why their body will not let them rest, because the hormonal activation driving the wakefulness is running entirely beneath the threshold of conscious awareness. The thyroid connection to 2 in the morning waking is less commonly discussed, but clinically relevant and worth naming clearly. The thyroid gland and its hormonal output influence metabolic rate, heat regulation, heart rate, and the sensitivity of virtually every tissue in the body to the sympathetic nervous system's activation signals. When thyroid function is elevated, either from hyperthyroidism or from the swings associated with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, an autoimmune thyroid condition that affects a significant proportion of women over 40, the heightened metabolic state and increased sympathetic sensitivity can produce wakefulness in the early morning hours at the time when the body's temperature and metabolic rate should be at their overnight low. Symptoms that accompany this kind of thyroid-driven waking include a sensation of warmth or sweating, a racing or pounding heart, an anxious quality to the wakefulness, and difficulty returning to sleep even when no specific worry is present. These symptoms overlap with the symptoms of menopause-related night disturbances in women and are frequently attributed to that cause rather than evaluated for thyroid contributions. The emotional and psychological dimension of 2 in the morning waking deserves acknowledgement here because it is real even when the primary driver is physiological. The undefended quality of early morning wakefulness, the darkness, the silence, the absence of the distractions and activities that ordinarily manage anxiety and worry creates a cognitive environment in which concerns that are manageable during the day feel overwhelming at 2 in the morning. This is a genuine psychological phenomenon called nocturnal rumination, and it operates in a bidirectional relationship with the physiological drivers we have discussed. The cortisol and adrenaline released by the liver processing event, or the blood sugar drop, make the mind more reactive and less capable of returning to restful states. The amplified worry and rumination then sustain the cortisol and sympathetic activation, preventing the physiological return to sleep, even after the initial biological trigger has resolved. Breaking this cycle requires addressing both the physiological trigger that initiates the waking and the cognitive pattern that extends it, which is why neither pure physiological intervention nor pure psychological approach is typically sufficient on its own for people with established 2 in the morning waking patterns. Now let us talk about what to do with this understanding, because information without direction is incomplete. The interventions that address 2 in the morning waking most effectively target the specific drivers rather than sleep in general, and the first step is identifying which driver is most likely responsible in your specific situation. If your 2 in the morning waking is accompanied by a general sense of anxiety or activation without specific thoughts, if you feel warm or sweaty, if your heart feels fast or prominent in your chest, and if you have any history of thyroid issues or significant hormonal changes, thyroid function testing is the appropriate starting point. A comprehensive thyroid panel including TSH, free T3, free T4, and thyroid antibodies will reveal whether thyroid contributions are present and whether they require clinical management. If your waking is accompanied by a mildly anxious feeling that is not specifically emotional but feels more physiological, if you have any history of blood sugar irregularity or family history of diabetes, and if the feeling resolves relatively quickly without escalating, blood sugar dysregulation is the likely primary driver. Addressing this requires changes to the evening dietary pattern, specifically avoiding refined carbohydrates and alcohol close to bedtime, ensuring adequate protein in the evening meal to slow overnight glucose release, and possibly having a very small amount of complex carbohydrate before sleep to stabilize overnight blood glucose. If your waking correlates with elevated stress periods, if you have a history of high cortisol indicators such as truncal weight gain, high blood pressure, or persistent fatigue despite adequate sleep, and if you have been under prolonged physical or psychological stress, adrenal dysregulation is worth evaluating through salivary cortisol testing, which measures cortisol at multiple points across the day and night to reveal the shape of the cortisol rhythm and identify abnormal surges. Supporting adrenal function through adaptogenic herbs such as ashwagandha, which has documented evidence for normalizing cortisol rhythms and reducing HPA axis hyperactivity, and through phosphatidylserine, which directly blunts excessive cortisol secretion, addresses this driver at the hormonal level. If your 2 in the morning waking is part of a broader pattern that includes digestive discomfort, bloating, afternoon fatigue, and a general sense of sluggishness, particularly on days after heavier eating or alcohol consumption, the liver processing hypothesis is the most likely primary driver. The interventions for this were covered in depth on this channel in the context of the 3 in the morning liver waking video, and they include milk thistle and dandelion root teas in the evening, a lighter earlier evening meal, and the elimination or reduction of alcohol in the hours before sleep. Across all of these drivers, there are universal sleep architecture supports that improve the quality of the sleep that does occur and reduce the physiological reactivity that makes waking more likely. Magnesium glycinate taken in the evening directly supports the parasympathetic nervous system, reduces cortisol reactivity, and improves the depth and continuity of sleep by supporting the GABA signaling system that is the primary neurological pathway of sleep maintenance. Research on magnesium supplementation and sleep quality in older adults consistently shows improvements in sleep duration, in sleep efficiency, and in subjective sleep quality that are attributed to both the direct neurological calming effect and the reduction in the overnight cortisol activity that magnesium supports. Glycine, the amino acid, taken at 3 to 5 grams before bed, has been shown in clinical research to improve sleep quality, reduce daytime fatigue, and lower core body temperature in a way that facilitates the deeper sleep stages from which 2 in the morning waking is most disruptive, and the consistent management of the light environment in the hour before bed, specifically the elimination of blue spectrum light that suppresses melatonin production and delays the onset of the deep sleep phases, reduces the physiological vulnerability to early morning waking by ensuring that sleep architecture is as deep and consolidated as possible during the vulnerable 2 to 3 in the morning window. There is something profound about the fact that the body wakes us in the dark, at the same time, with such regularity, that the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Because patterns in the body are never random, The biological world does not produce consistent timed events without a consistent timed cause. The 2 in the morning alarm that nobody set is being set by something. A liver processing cycle under strain, a blood sugar event, a cortisol pattern that has lost its proper rhythm, a thyroid that is running too hot for the overnight rest it is supposed to allow. These are not the vague language of aging. They are specific biological events with specific biological signatures and specific biological solutions. And the fact that most people who experience this pattern have never been offered this framework is not because the framework does not exist. It exists, documented in the research, known by the specialists who study these systems. It is simply not reaching the people who wake at 2 in the morning and lie there wondering what is wrong with them and whether they will ever sleep through the night again. You now have the framework. You know the drivers. You know which symptoms point to which causes and which interventions address each one. The 2 in the morning waking that felt mysterious and untreatable is a signal with a source. And signals with sources have responses. Tell me in the comments what time you consistently wake and whether any part of this framework resonated with what you have been experiencing. The person who reads your comment tomorrow may be lying awake right now, looking for exactly the same answers you were looking for before you watched this. Your words matter here. And please share this video with someone in your life whose sleep has been fragmented in this specific pattern, someone who has been told there is nothing to be done about waking at 2 in the morning except to accept it. Because now there is something to be done, and they deserve to know what it is. The dark hours are not your enemy. They are your body's most honest conversation. The question is whether you are finally ready to listen.